Hey guys, Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC and BHSpringSolutions.com, back again for another session of High Power University. And this is going to be the wrap-up session for the case study about the Charles Daly High Power. And in this session, we're going to just recap what was done with this high power. You remember the Charles Dalys were made from FEG Slide and Frame stock. And so were the Carine Mark 1s, and so were the Mauser ADSAs. And with respect to the Charles Daly, a real difference between this and the Carine Mark 1. Virtually everything in the Carine Mark 1 high power components will drop into. With many of the FEGs, definitely with the Charles Dalys, many high power components are not drop in. They may drop in, but function out of the gate is not going to be what it could be. So we're going to talk about the main differences and recap the differences between the Charles Daly and what we would see in a typical FN or Browning high power. Because here's the difficult thing to understand. These are both high powers, and these are different guns. And this is not the 1911 world at all, where everybody's CNC machining off of the same blueprints, and the high power is completely opposite in that respect. In that this is an FN Browning high power. Yes, FEG was licensed to make high powers. Yes, Inglis in Canada was licensed to make high powers. FM in Argentina was licensed to make high powers. And nobody made this high power, the FN Browning, because their strategy was the FN Browning high power blueprints were, this is not what you got if you got licensed to make high powers by FN. You got a different set of blueprints, and we're going to kind of show you some of the differences in these two. And as it relates to the Charles Daly, I consider the Charles Daly to be one of the more challenging high powers to optimize or do anything with at all. You're not going to find Charles Daly high power parts, most likely. So anything that you do, you're going to be using high power parts that are probably originally intended for this handgun. I want to show you some of the things that we had to do. And we'll just double check one more time that yes, we're clear, no magazines, no ammunition. Take a look at this hammer here. Take a look at the hammer shape here. We've got a rear sight that is a huge dovetail, and then the slide was flattened or milled at the top. Take a look at the difference in the firing pin retaining plate of these two pistols, that being the part here. We're rounded here. They've squared it off on the back hit of this one here. This is like an Inglis or an Indian-made Ishapur. The firing pin retaining plate looks the same as it does on this Charles Daly. So that's what they did with the sight. I don't know of any press out, press in sight solution for the Charles Daly. Both the rear and the front dovetails are larger than Mark III dovetails, so there's not an easy way home to change sights that we know of right now. The reason that you see this material having been relieved on the hammer here is because you're going to hit this sight if you don't relieve some material here. So that is a necessary modification that you have to do, because you can't fire the weapon unless you can clear this sight. So that's one of the things we had to do. I'm going to show you here at the bottom of the magwell, and this is easiest to see if you look at this area right here, and you see how much more metal there is there. Another kind of one that you don't need a caliper to see this one. See how thin that metal is here, and how much thicker that it is on the Charles Daly. Again, it's just a difference. Take a look at the grips. These are both identical grips. They're cut with a CNC machine, so they're extremely consistent. But take a look at the grip. Comes right nice to the back of the grip frame, and you see on the Charles Daly we got lots and lots of material here. We got more material here. So again, it's a different gun. So these are some of the differences. I thought this would be interesting. Neither one of these has a magazine in them. We're 30.5 ounces with the Charles Daly. Now this one has a little bit of extra weight. We got 4 screws, and we've got the Picatinny rail, which is feather light, so that's not going to make too much of a difference. Also got a lanyard ring on this high power, so and we're 30 here. What was the first one? We're 30 ounces and 30.6. So we're more than a half an ounce heavier with the Charles Daly, in spite of the little bit more hardware and apparatus on the Browning. So that shows you a difference there too. Some of the things that we did, I'm going to recap here on this. The Charles Daly ejector has a profile that creates a result of an engagement area at the front of the ejector, and we see 2.21, and then on a new FN Browning part we're 2.7 millimeters. So the reason for changing out the ejector is because we were getting very, very, very poor consistency of extraction of the empty shell casings. These things were going kind of straight up in the air. I had one of them, a couple of them lop out right on my hand. This was not a slide cycling issue, the slide cycling too slowly. This was an extractor that was holding on just like a beast, and it was contacting an ejector that was smaller than this one. And the first thing we did, we replaced out the ejector. The FN Browning part was drop in on the ejector part, but we put the ejector in first, and we started getting better extraction, more consistent extraction. It wasn't anything to write home about or make a video about, but it was better, and we definitely improved things by replacing out that ejector. Finally, we really could have stayed with this Charles Daly extractor. Some of the things that kind of show up is, my goodness, look at the positioning of that hole in the extractor for one, and we have only about a 0.5 millimeter of thickness of steel here. We definitely have a little bit more here, and that seemed to be something that I was really interested in, having the FN Browning extractor in the pistol. Another nuance that we found as we were doing all this testing is, here's the extractor spring that we originally had in there. This spring was unmodified, and you see how it is already getting an arc in it. It's not perfectly straight anymore, and it's got this kind of an arc going on. This spring was mashed, and it was trying to get itself out of the way and use some kind of room on both sides of it to fit in the space that it was in, and this same spring drops in every other high power I think that we know of, except the Charles Daly, and the place for the extractor spring appears to be shallower than other high powers, and so we did modify the extractor spring in order to get where we needed to go, because with the spring literally mashed, we had very little range of motion of the extractor at all. And the way that we took off a little bit of spring off of the extractor spring to fit it was I just used a simple tool like this on a Dremel, and I just used the edge, and I went to the bottom, not the conical shaped top that comes in contact with your ejector, and I just started taking off about a quarter, about 1/4 of a coil, and it was just a matter of just like this until it popped off about a 1/4 of a coil. Put it in, check it, try it, and wound up taking off about 3/4 of a coil. And the spring then had sufficient room, and we still had good hold with the extractor, consistent hold with the extractor. We did that little video there shooting, and it was specifically because we wanted to see the quality of the extraction. And so we did that. We do have now a Charles Daly that does affirmatively spit the magazines out. We solved the issue of the sear spring being too tight when we adjusted that sear spring. Now have had this handgun here several days with this with the sear spring that we did adjust. One last time we're going to scale this trigger. And that time we had 5 3/4. And right there we're 5 1/4. So you can have a little bit of change depending on where on the trigger that your scale is going. I usually go on these new advanced BH triggers, just about like you see it there, and we're right at 5 1/2. So that's a fairly good average for this trigger break that we've seen here the last few days since we've had this Charles Daly. I wanted to take a moment and mention something else, and that is, here are some pictures of FEG's models, some of their models. Here would be a representation of, I believe this was probably their first. Okay, we got some FEGs. I wanted to share this with you because there's some things that FEG did over the years that was interesting. This is the original slide stop for a high power, and the high power, the notch in the high power, if you will, it looks, in that model that I just showed you, it looks just like that. Well, FEG decided to make a double action, single action, high power variant. Apparently FEG wanted to cross as many parts between these two pistols, the double action, single action variant and their single action high power. They did use, you can see the same extractor, uses the same extractor spring in the double action, single action variant. And apparently they wanted a different slide stop. Maybe they were wanting one that was a little bit more extended and easier to reach. And you see this, that is a different slide stop. You'll notice on the high power's original slide stop, you've got this area, and that area basically covers or conceals this. And when they decided to change their slide stop, you'll notice that the later generation, there's no kind of a concealment in the design. Hopefully this is better. This design does not come up and cover a hole. So if you were going to use that style of a slide stop with this kind of a slide, you got a big hole in the gun that's going to show. And it's not going to cover up. You know, when you put the RDIH extended slide stop as an example, you know, it does a nice job of concealing that hole, if you will, or the area for the slide stop to go in. So, you know, you have a nice finished look. You don't have a hole in your gun. They wanted a different slide stop, obviously, and I think what they did is they came up with a design that they could use in both of these pistols, so they'd only need to make one part. But that created a problem because of the hole, and you still have a hole, but it's a very small hole. And if you work specifically with this design, we saw that also, the same design. It's a blurry picture, but this is the FEG model that has the top rail on it, and this picture shows that same one. This slide stop notch right there, and you can see it maybe better in this picture here. That slide stop notch is, you have to fit an RDIH slide stop in order to hit that notch when the slide comes back. And it can be done. We've done it. We do it in our service center, but this is quite involved, the fitting and the filing that you have to do on a traditional slide stop in order to get it to go up in that little notch when the slide recoils and you don't have anything in the magazine. The follower wants to push the slide stop up. Fitting to that little notch, and they made that notch so small specifically because it's a hole in the gun, and they weren't going to cover it anymore with a slide stop, so they had to do something. So that's what they did, is they made it very kind of concealed in the fact that it's extremely small. So that is another thing that we come into contact, not on this Charles Daly. This had the traditional style of the slide. So that was one last thing that I wanted to show you. I think we've covered all the differences between the Charles Daly and our good friend and BH veteran who owns this pistol. Is going to be seeing this back very, very soon. You know, there's one more thing I did want to show you real quickly, and this here will be a really good example. And we're going to talk barrels a minute. If our BH veteran is going to use this handgun for defensive purposes, you'll notice it does have the arced feed ramp. Here, not as good for feeding blunt-nosed ammunition as a straight feed ramp. So probably, unless this is going to be specifically a range gun, he wants to use this particular barrel or a target pistol. I want to show you the crown of that pistol. If we can get a close-up on that. In fact, I'm going to show you the difference in that and an example of an 11-degree crown on a BH barrel, and you can kind of really see the difference. But what you're seeing here is this has become very polygonal, very much like a polygon, if you will, not so circular. And it doesn't. You don't have to have a degree in physics to figure out that a bullet being released by a crown that is substantially round, or a bullet being released by a barrel with a crown that kind of looks like that. This is going to be an accuracy issue if you get out to any kind of appreciable distance. This is going to become an accuracy issue almost certainly. So we're going to suggest that to our BH veteran here that if he plans to use this in a defensive role, probably he needs to upgrade the barrel. If he's going to use it strictly in a target kind of role and not going to be using blunt-nosed ammunition, this would be a good candidate to just BH can recrown the barrel. And so we're going to suggest one of those two things to the BH veteran who owns this Charles Daly. At this point, this is a really, really super functioning high power. It's a pleasure to shoot. The trigger is now just wonderful, and I've had a ball with this. It's been a lot of work, and there's a lot of fitting involved. It's one of the most challenging high power clones that you will find when you start putting parts and components into it. But very gratifying, very fun to bring one in like this when it takes that much to do it. And I'm sorry, I thought I was done. I'm not done. I want to show you one more difference. If you think these are not different guns, notice the little notch out in the grip right here. That is to give room for the magazine release, because when you push the magazine, it has to clear that grip. I did with a file with a little bit of an arc and angle to it, and I did come from the back of the grip right there at that edge, so now we have clearance for the magazine. Also, this grip did not require any other fitting except to clear that magazine release. On this side, I took off about 1.5 millimeters on the back of this grip in order to fit it, because again, it's just it's a different frame, and things don't always fit drop in on these handguns. So that was the last thing I wanted to show you. Thank you for watching, folks. Mark Allen, BHSpringSolutions LLC, and BHSpringSolutions.com.